Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, December 1st, beginning of a new month. December 1st, 2023. This is it. The end of 2023 is coming. We count it down now, like an advent calendar, which I guess we start today as well. So, happy whatever that is to everybody who does that thing. I have no idea, really. We have an advent calendar this year because I love calendars, as you know. And this year, the fun of the advent calendar, as far as I understand it, is there are good things to eat in some advent calendars. That's a fun way of counting down the days to one particular holiday, anyway. And it's coming up, December. It's that time again. Our advent calendar this year, and I should note for the record, we have never had one before, so it's not like we look forward to this every year, and this year the big new surprises, but I don't know. Seemed like a good idea this time. It's a little thing with little tiny bottles of jams and preserves in it, which I love, and I'm looking forward to it, and then I'm looking forward to running out of all that stuff at the end, too, and then saying, now, what have we left to live for? But as it turns out, there's a big holiday at the end. So, okay, and I think it's also about a week until New Year's at that point. And I don't know. Then you always wonder the same question all over again. But you resolve to come up with something by the end of the evening so that there is something to look forward to. And there's so much to look forward to, so much to look back on. We should do our year-end retrospective now, except there's too much news, and we have to get to it. Boy, are there stories. And each one, something you could spend the entire show on. Let's see, a couple of hints here from Justice about what he's thinking about. Yes, Leonard Leo will be subpoenaed by the Senate, is it the Senate Judiciary Committee? But it doesn't matter because, as you know, in the Federalist Society, they don't believe in congressional subpoenas. So he's ready to defy his congressional subpoena. On what grounds, we're not really sure. Just, I'm really important and I'm in the Federalist Society and I think judges will bail me out maybe, or I'll say I'm being canceled if that's happened, if they don't save me. I don't know exactly what's going on, but there's procedural news in that. Joan wrote about it at Daily Kos. There was some real action, procedural action in the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday. And, the second hint is from something else waiting in the wings. I had this story yesterday. I just couldn't shoehorn it in, but it's not like I broke the story or anything. You know, it's not me doing the reporting, but by now you will have heard. And now I have at least two versions of this story. In his little dropping the hint here, he says, how good is a Moms for Liberty sandwich? When they use so much mayo. Oh my, okay. Well, hey, good morning. It's breakfast time. Maybe a breakfast sandwich is exactly what you had on your mind, but maybe not a Moms for Liberty sandwich, or Moms, as I've seen, Moms for Indecent Liberties I've seen floated out there. I thought maybe Moms, instead of Moms for Liberty, maybe Moms 3 Liberty was better. I don't know, but somehow it would be better if they just had you'll get the story in just a second. And then there's some serious stuff, including, I guess, probably one of the more shocking stories to get a front page headline in the New York Times and everything else. I don't know if it's front page. I assume it's front page. There's no pages anymore. There is. They sell them in paper. We just don't get them around here. Indicating that Israeli intelligence at some point in the past year actually intercepted what turned out to be the plans for the October 7th attack. Hamas's massive campaign from out of Gaza, and they had it in their hands, and apparently, I guess, to really long story short it, they got it and said, this probably isn't real, or this is merely an aspirational plan. They don't have it in them. They don't have the wherewithal to launch an attack of this scale. And so, I mean, I don't really know why the answer to that was, so we'll ignore it, but apparently it was. And I think this just adds fuel to the fire of massive intelligence failure under the Netanyahu regime. All of his raison d'etre was garbage from start to finish, and we ought to get rid of him. We'll see to what extent there's wartime rallying around Netanyahu, but so far it hasn't materialized, and it's been quite a while. I don't know. I think this is... we can only hope that this is the nail in the political coffin. I don't really want to be talking about more nails and more coffins at this point, but it is that time, since the truce is apparently over. They didn't agree to any additional extensions as far as I know. It was just sort of a situation of, well, as long as nothing starts again, we won't start again. But it has started again with a rocket barrage reported from out of Gaza. Don't know for sure who started what when. I think most international expectations weren't exactly shattered by the idea of Hamas starting with some more rocket attacks and then Israel resuming its operations. Could it have happened in reverse? Yes, but I don't know. I think everyone was enjoying some reasonably good, for the first time in months, PR, to the extent that matters about anything, by having this truce hold, having it be extended, having prisoners released. So I don't know in whose interest it was to restart, but someone has restarted, and we'll be seeing resuming military operations in Gaza. But right in the middle of this is this massive story of this tremendous Israeli intelligence failure. But I don't know. There's no way to do this but to do it and just jump in and start throwing stories at you. Let's begin with the somewhat more lighthearted story. I got this, as I said, a day or two ago from a source I don't know or recognize, but they were the first ones out there. Oh, and I guess, oh, look at this. I'm trying to get the story, and I guess this little website, which was, I don't even know what this is, and I can't even load it. They're overwhelmed by traffic, I assume, from their publishing this story. As I recall, though, the website is Florida, FLCGA, and FLCGA.org. And of course, I can't load it and find out what that stands for. But as I recall, that I thought that this was the source was calling itself the Florida Bulldog or something like that, if I recall correctly. And that's the first place I saw this story. And it looks here like, it looks like their original story won't be available to me at all, even in Pocket, because they have an actual robust, either because they have an actual robust firewall, or because now their site has been overwhelmed with bandwidth requests, and so therefore it can't render in Pocket. But I will remind you of this. The Florida CGA is, I will inform you of this. Florida CGA is the Florida Center for Government Accountability, which claims in its page here, I assume they're serious about their claim, I just don't know, that they're a nonpartisan 501c3 organization focusing on government accountability and journalistic efforts, primarily on local governments, providing support and assistance for citizens and investigative journalists working to hold government accountable. And they remind you that they can accept tax-deductible donations. So perhaps if you're interested in supporting their work on this topic, you might want to jump in and help them out. And goodness, wow. Well, let's see. They spell it all out in what looks like a headline for Bob Norman. Again, I haven't been able to reload and verify that that's the right author. Bob Norman reporting under the headline, Florida Gop Chair. Is he the chair? Is that what he does? Christian Ziegler. And it should probably tip you off right away. They named him Christian, and he calls himself Christian rather than Chris or whatever. So we're about to get a headline about him doing something maybe not so super Christian or something. Well, as it turns out, I don't know that it's unchristian to do this necessarily, but it's unchristian to penalize everybody else for having any thoughts of this type while you're doing exactly that. It's the basic Republican hypocrisy story over and over again. Florida Gop Chair Christian Ziegler, husband of a Moms for Liberty co-founder, that's what she does in life, accused of sexual battery by alleged menage a trois lover. Now, it was that I didn't think there was anything particularly unchristian. I don't know. I mean, I guess you would say, well, Christianity, marriage, man, one man, one woman, I guess, traditionally in Christianity. But of course, I don't know that there's anything particularly unchristian about the gender issues there. Could we have same-sex marriage and still be Christian? Plenty of people are doing it, so I guess so. But so I don't know that there's anything in the Bible anywhere that says, this whole menage a trois thing is just out. I mean, there's one man, one woman. There's the Garden of Eden story, but then they threw in there's animals. Hey, there's fruit. I don't know, whatever. But the sexual battery thing, that I'm pretty sure you can find something more explicit about, and nonviolence being something of a crucial value. Anyway, you throw it all together and the hypocrisy, and it doesn't look great. And it looks like we'll have to turn to the pocket version of the Rolling Stone version of this story. Thanks to Scott for sending this one to me this morning. I was all prepared, like, I already have this story. I'm on top of this. And then it turns out, hey, I can't get it. So thanks for sending it. And let's see, Nikki McCann Ramirez, thank you for writing it. Florida Gop Chair accused of sexually assaulting threesome partner. And a lot of questions raised by all of this, but let's get to the story first, and then we'll ask the questions along the way. Christian Ziegler, the Florida Gop Chair and husband of Moms for Liberty co-founder Bridget Ziegler, is under criminal investigation over allegations of sexual battery by a woman who claims to have been involved in a long-term sexual relationship with both of the Zieglers. The investigation was first reported by the Florida Gop Accountability Project's new division, the Florida Trident. How do you like that? So the Florida Republican Party's own accountability project news division, the Florida Trident. That's interesting. So I guess somebody wanted to stab him in the back and be rid of him and replace him. And whether it was because they wanted a real moral example for all Americans to follow, or they just wanted their turn to grift and steal and have three ways presumably for God. And, well, it's all the more ironic, of course, because, here Bridget Ziegler is a big deal. I mean, he's the Florida Republican chair. That's big enough. And she's Moms for Liberty. She's out there banning books lest anyone get any sexual ideas from any books. Like if a handsome prince kisses the sleeping beauty, kissing, we can't have that. They're actually throwing books like that out and saying that's pornography. You can't show it to those kids. And it's just hard to believe that you land on that conclusion when you're like in a long time three-way relationship. You don't say, I can see separating it obviously and saying, well, this is for adults. Now for kids, we don't want to teach them anything. Although now I wonder, did they read something as kids in their school libraries that made them say, I think we should have a third person in our marriage. I just throw that in. I don't know what book that would have been. And I don't, of course, to me, do you ban that book even if you find out? Well, no, because but you might ask, what is this doing in a school library anyway? Where did you check that book out, Bridget? What happened? But of course, there was no such book. And this is what makes this story so amazing to me is that I haven't even told you the story yet, but what do you need to know? I mean, and I'm focusing on the sex part of it, which is the least offensive part of it. The battery is I should just read this article because that's where we'll all get offended that way. According to a police complaint obtained by the Trident and sources who spoke to the publication, the woman alleges that Christian Ziegler raped her on October 2nd. And while the pair were alone in her home in Sarasota, Florida. Again, don't want to spend too much time on a tangent, but I don't even understand the dynamics of this thing. Like if she is in a long-term relationship with the two of you, what would drive you to do this? And the answer is, misogyny and power dynamics, and there was all sorts of terrible things that go into something like this. But like, it's not a matter of this guy, I don't know, having some weird, uncontrollable desire, and there's no possibility that he'd ever be able to consummate this in any other way. But, he's a wackadoodle and a power mad weirdo and a misogynist, I guess, is all. I don't know. Why I'm looking to explain it, I don't know. I should just keep going. Again, the story is here. It's just otherworldly to me. I just don't connect in any way with the sorts of things. I mean, my other tangential question is how you get to a point in your life where you're like, I just really enjoy this whole three-way relationship thing. It's cool with my wife. Okay, whatever. Again, I don't have any basis to, connect with you over something like that, but do people do that? Yeah. But what I don't get is then saying, you know what, though? We should build careers, both of us, me and you. I don't know what this third woman wants to do, but we should build careers on shaming people for ever having thoughts like we've built our life on. And we should hide it. And the benefits are so huge. After all, what could any person in America want more than heading the Republican Party in Florida and being invited to speak in places where you could be a moral scold for others? Maybe they had greater designs. I'll be the governor of Florida and I'll steal state money and we'll live in a lavish lifestyle that way. Or we'll bring a fourth, fifth, and sixth person into this marriage because of all the resources at our disposal that we steal. I don't know what the plan was. I just don't know how you, don't wake up and say, I got to get out of this. This is crazy. One of these two things has got to go. Either, why not just stop being Florida Republican Party chair and Moms for Liberty, and we'll enjoy the sex life we've built for ourselves, and to hell with everybody else. I just can't imagine working at all to, I'm just not interested in putting any effort into combining these two lifestyles. I can't. Why would you? I just don't understand the way their minds work. Okay. So there's the most serious allegation. The police report mentions, according to a complaint obtained by the Trident and the sources who spoke to the publication, the woman alleges that Christian Ziegler raped her on October 2nd while the pair were alone in her home in Sarasota. The police report mentions the phrases raped, sexual assault allegation, and sexually battered, but it is otherwise heavily redacted. Because, of course, they're huge into privacy, these three. Sources with knowledge of the investigation told the Trident that police officers executed a search warrant on Ziegler's phone, and the Gop Chair is alleged to have recorded sexual encounters between himself, his wife, and the woman. Also a bad idea, except for people who are like, ultimately, I want to be caught here. The thrill for me is the anticipation of being exposed as whatever the hell he is. And then if it's not bad enough, if people will say, well, that's their business, how they have sex. After all, the Republican Party is huge into libertarianism and privacy, except when they're not. And, but so somehow he had to make it worse. Well, let me at least be openly misogynist and actually hurt people. Then I'm guaranteed to be thought of as a lowlife. So he went ahead and did it. Charges have not yet been filed against Ziegler somehow, and the incident remains under investigation. Ziegler, of course, has denied any wrongdoing. We don't know whether it's I've never done any of this or it wasn't wrong for me to do it. Let's see. This he did with the help of his attorney, Derek Bird, telling the Herald Tribune that his client, quote, will be completely exonerated, unquote, and nothing that Ziegler has, and noting that Ziegler has been, quote, fully cooperative with every request made by the Sarasota Police Department. The allegations against Ziegler and the claims that he and his wife were involved in a polyamorous relationship, plus rape, mark the second sex-related scandal to rock the upper echelons of the far-right activist group Moms for Liberty in recent weeks. Who knew they were so freaky? Although, really, couldn't we all have guessed? Earlier this month, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported that Philip Fisher Jr., oh yeah, we did this story, all the sex stories, hooray, an organizer and pastor for the organization in Philadelphia, is a registered sex offender. Fisher Jr. was convicted in 2012 of sexually abusing a 14-year-old boy. So, everybody's involved in this one. Moms for Liberty, which campaigns aggressively against education on issues of gender, race, and sexuality in schools, postures itself as deeply moralistic and represents its leadership as embodiments of traditional Christian family values. The notion that one of its founders is involved in a ménage à trois, we have to use a Julia Child voice for that? I don't know. It's French, right? And that her husband may have assaulted their mutual partner, that's the part that's actually horrific, stands antithetical to the public face the organization attempts to present. What? In response to the allegation, the Florida Democratic Party called for Ziegler's resignation. They're always looking to Democrats in Florida. Tell us what to do with our Florida Republican leadership structure. Well, they have to make an attack, right? Allegations of rape and sexual battery are severe and should be taken seriously. I applaud the accuser's bravery in coming forward against a political figure as powerful as Christian Ziegler. That's true. And I trust that the Sarasota Police Department will conduct a thorough investigation. I don't know if I trust it, but why not say so? Into these allegations of criminal behavior. Florida Democratic Party Chair Nikki Fried. Remember her? Didn't she run for, did she run for governor? Is that what? Okay. Nikki Fried still back in the game here. And she said this in a statement released Thursday. I thought she did a pretty good job campaigning. She did not ultimately win the governorship, but glad to see her still involved. Christian Ziegler cannot possibly continue to lead the Florida Gop under these conditions, she added. Oh, watch him try. Given the severity of the criminal allegations, I'm calling for his immediate resignation. You got a call, I guess. But there you go. Okay, so they're out there trying to ban books lest kids learn to, grow up to become like them. That is bad news. Man, there's a lot. I don't know if there's any way to sort of transition from one of these stories to another. I just find that one baffling for so many reasons. Like I said, not the least of which is, I guess, assuming it's true, and I clearly am assuming it's true, I just don't know how you reconcile your daily life to this. But I guess in Gimmitarian world, you can reconcile everything. Actually, there was another story that happened just the other day. What was I thinking about with this one? But I was reminded the other day of how we used to say all the time that Trump world is a sex cult. And it was, when was it we were saying? Something else had happened recently, and I was just saying, oh, yeah. Right. But I don't remember what triggered the thought, but maybe I can come up with it by scrolling down a little bit. But you remembered, or what was it? It was that I guess I was bringing that old thing back up because I was just I don't even know how to transition to this, but there was an op-ed recently. One of the I just out of the blue can't really understand why they ever decided to go down this road, but they actually wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post a couple of days ago. I think about a week ago, right? Doing the whole, hey, we've found out that younger women these days are essentially very much uninterested. Let's put it this way. Very much uninterested in having or entering into relationships of any kind with Trump-supporting men. Now, this has been something we've known about for quite some time. But it pops up from time to time. But they actually wrote an op-ed about this, and it was the whole editorial board was signed by no one in particular. The editorial board put their heads together for this, which is amazing. from the 22nd of this month. If attitudes don't shift, it says in the headline, a political dating mismatch, okay, will threaten marriage. No, not at all. What are you talking about? And they actually are casting this in terms of like, oh my God, we'll never be able to keep the planet populated. It's the end of the species because women, I think rightly, in one corner of the world are deciding maybe I would like to have something in common with my sexual partner, particularly if we're going to partner on raising children as well. I mean, I think that's a pretty good choice, but I just can't believe that they made that leap. But they did, and it was a terrible idea for them to write on it. And of course, Amanda Marcotte fairly quickly took that up and, beat the crap out of it. But I just thought it was an amazing thing to take up as a topic. But it did make me wonder, too. I'll read you a bit of the story here, and then we'll jump out for our first break. But I was keeping in mind, like, the whole Trump world is a sex cult thing. Like, to go back to the original reason I said things like that was it seemed like they were telling their young followers, like, basically, listen, we understand that most of you are ostracized losers, whether that means incel or anything of the sort. I don't know, not always, but that they basically said, while we're lying, cheating, and stealing, we could probably get you laid as well. What do you think about that? And they just, they throw themselves into these, like they had these weird orgiastic parties at Steve Bannon's place in the Breitbart world. Trump, of course, has been hypersexualized for a long time and is a rapist. But here again, like, if you didn't think it was possible, like, that's something that president definitely can't do, right? Like, instead of a second-term plan, he's going to get, hey, everybody, we're all going to get laid. That's not really a great presidential platform. And presidents definitely can't do that, right? Well, this one says he can. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. By the way, quick update, breaking news. Well, I mean, plans for breaking news later, I guess, maybe. I note from everyone's good friend Laffy. Gotta laugh, working over on the Mastodon side of things, noting via Scott McFarlane that we are, I think we all are, America and the world, are expecting the vote on the expulsion of Representative George Santos. Sometime it is expected between 10:30 and 11, so maybe last segment of the show they'll be voting on it. We probably won't have results, so the timing is good. Once you get done listening to the show, you can immediately turn on C-SPAN. But don't forget to keep the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy running on your live stream. in the background so that you can stay up to date on all of that information, but also possibly watch what happens to George Santos. I don't know if I even have a prediction. I guess they're getting rid of him. I mean, it seems sort of inevitable at this point, but I don't know. We'll sit and watch and find out. By the way, let's see. What else have we? There was some. Everybody's gotten back into the habit today of tweeting out their morning announcements that were on the air. John Shiflett, welcome back to doing that on Mastodon, and Mighty OCD has been doing that fairly regularly in the last couple of days. I realized that I want to retweet those things first thing, and but they come up right as I have like the busy period of opening up all the other tabs and pressing all the buttons and everything. And then I forget. And then the break comes and I say, oh yeah, they're setting us up and potentially bringing in listeners. Got to go back and retweet, reskeet. We don't retweet anymore. There needs to be a more generic term for all of this. Anyway, let's see. I think let me slip back to the Mastodon side here, because John had something else to say. Oh yeah, right, about the Advent calendars. That's it. Plus he's got a story suggestion I'll file away for later on. A poem by Brian Bilston on the Advent calendars. I thought we could share that one, called The Good Old Days. And it's quick. We can get back to the bad news in just a minute. Pity the poor children of today with their calendars stuffed with chocolates. Never to know the thrill of opening a small cardboard door and discovering behind it a picture of a bell. Yeah, I imagine it was a less thrilling Advent calendars back in the day. And somebody came up with the idea of stuff them with goodies and people will be more interested. Well, it's worked. 50-something years into this and not actually, being a Christian, I finally decided to jump on the Advent calendar bandwagon purely for the treats. Certainly a picture of the bell would be of no interest to me. But it could be a very nice picture of a bell. There could be a cat ringing the bell, something like that. That might be nice. People share those pictures all the time. Anyway, back to what crazy piece of garbage news were we reading? Oh, yes, right. Explaining why Trump world is a sex cult. Well, okay. The Washington Post, I guess, thought they were being serious in writing this piece, the editorial board, the whole damn thing. If attitudes don't shift, a political dating mismatch will threaten marriage. Don't know what that is even supposed to mean, but ideological polarization is now a mainstay of American politics. Okay, so far so good. Millions of young Americans will go home this Thanksgiving, they did already, and find themselves in uncomfortable situations with relatives. That's probably true too. And, millions of people will go home and find themselves in uncomfortable situations with menage a trois partners as well, as it turns out, even if they're railing against all sexualization of any kind in their public lives. But they'll be in uncomfortable situations. It says especially uncles, apparently. Who even knew that? Who love former President Donald Trump, hate vaccination, or think that the January 6th Capitol insurrection had very fine people on both sides. It actually sounds like the description of a guy who's running for president. That is weird. Anyway, although he says he loves vaccination, so maybe not. In some ways, polarization is exactly what one would expect in a large, unwieldy democracy such as the United States. Americans no longer agree on many questions of how to live or what to live for. Sometimes people don't even agree with themselves, like the current chairman of the Florida Republican Party, for instance. These differences can't just be papered over through good faith dialogue because they are real. All right. The problem with polarization, though, here it is. Ready for the problem? Is that it has effects well beyond the political realm. Oh. And these can be difficult to anticipate. One example, I'll give another example. Global war. Okay. But other than that, there's another example that the Washington Post editorial board has thought of, and it is the collapse of American marriage. Who knew? Now, I don't know what's a bigger threat to American marriage, the idea that you should be compatible with your mate, or that there's a entire giant-ass state Republican Party advocating for chopping off everybody else's sex organs if they check out the wrong book, while having three-way relationship in their marriage and beating and raping one of the partners in it. But, I'm not certain which is the bigger threat to American marriage. But anyway, a growing number of young women are discovering that they can't find suitable male partners, possibly because many of them have been told, what is an okay thing to do? Have two partners at one time and beat one up and rape them. But tell everybody to be upstanding, moralistic Christians, one man, one woman, yada, yada, no dirty books, and get rid of the National Geographic magazines. As a whole, men are increasingly struggling with or suffering from higher unemployment, lower rates of educational attainment, that's obviously someone else's fault, more drug addiction and deaths of despair, and generally less purpose and direction in their lives. But it's not just that. There's a growing ideological divide, too. And isn't that the real tragedy here? Since Mr. Trump's election in 2016, the percentage of single women ages 18 to 30 who identify as liberal has shot up. Oh, no. Is that bad inherently? No, it's just the spillover effects that are a problem. People aren't getting laid, apparently. Or at least not enough angry dudes, or as somebody put it, uneffable hate nerds. That's a pretty good terminology for it, but it didn't come in this article. They don't use that kind of language there. See, they're respectable. They're writing about this at all. Thank God they're doing it. That's what respectable people want to be chatting about in the morning. Well, anyway, since Trump's election, the percentage of single women ages 18 to 30 who identify as liberal has shot up from slightly over 20% to 32%. Young men have not followed suit. If anything, they have grown more conservative. So it's a huge problem then. Look, you made me an ineffable hate nerd, so now you have to actually F me anyway. That's obviously logical. Like, okay, women have become more liberal. Men, young men, have become more conservative. Isn't that a problem? Now they're incompatible. Women, change your stuff. Do it all differently. Because the men have become more conservative and would just like you to shut the hell up and have sex with them. And the Washington Post is actually writing an editorial saying, yep, that's how we should fix it. Not the men should not change. No. Absolutely not. Well, okay, so they've grown more conservative. Let me see how they get to this. This ideology gap, as a matter of fact, is particularly pronounced among Gen Z white people. According to a major new American Enterprise Institute survey, don't believe them, 46% of white Gen Z women are liberal compared to only 28% of white Gen Z men, more of whom, 36%, now identify as conservative. Norms around sexuality and gender are diverging too, whereas 61% of Gen Z women see themselves as feminist, only 43% of Gen Z men do. It is little surprise that the manfluencers, why are we even talking about this? One of the worst neologisms I've ever seen, except I'm reminded from the three-way marriage thing over there that I think the worst new word in the world is throuple. I can't even say it. That actually sounds like a medical condition more than anything else, like an old-time thing. I've got the grip and a throuple as well. And what a terrible... Anyway, it is little surprise that the manfluencers, particularly those such as British American kickboxer and rapist and human trafficker Andrew Tate, who promote outright misogyny, and they really do, have the biggest following among boys and young men. Now, that's bad, and I think, to me, if we're living in a world where you can get away with saying, well, I'm a Nazi, sure, but you made me a Nazi by saying I was a Nazi, and I figured I might as well become a Nazi. Since I'm already being branded with it, why not lean into it all the way? Like, what's the reaction among younger women supposed to be to finding out that the manfluencers that are teaching their generation of the other gender to be misogynist? Like, are they going to say, we should be misogynist too to have something in common with them? Or are they going to say, you know what, I actually reject that? Oh, so you're becoming more liberal then, huh? Great. What timing? As they're becoming more conservative, you're becoming more liberal. How is marriage going to survive? I don't know. Talk to the rape proponent over here who's making videos about how to be a human trafficker. That's the guy to worry about with respect to the threat to marriage. This is unbelievable, quite honestly, that they even did this. In another era, they continue, unbelievably, political or ideological differences might have had less impact on marriage rates. But of course, in another era, you weren't making, how-to human trafficking misogyny videos. But increasingly, the political is personal. They make videos about it. A 2021 survey of college students found that 71% of Democrats would not date someone with opposing views. And I can understand where to an old-timer that might sound really weird. But if the opposing political views are, you should, as a matter of due course, as a matter of regular daily practice, beat, intimidate, and belittle the women you're interested in sexually. Like, okay, I have a big difference of opinion with that, and I simply won't get involved in a relationship with that person. Not because it's unrelated, but because it's directly related. But that's their political views. You could separate their political views from their personal views. Well, not in this case. To the extent that it is a political viewpoint, that my worldview demands that I beat, sexually abuse, and threaten my sexual partners because things will be better that way. The personal, really is the personal political? Yeah, it is. I mean, this really glosses over everything about the entire nature of Trumpism. Anyway, increasingly the political is personal. The survey of college students found 71% of Democrats wouldn't date someone with opposing views. There is some logic to this. Marriage across religious or political lines, if either partner considers those things to be central to their identity, can be associated with lower levels of life satisfaction. Also, getting punched in the face and trafficked, also highly correlated with it. And politics is becoming more central to people's identity. Like, people are letting politics say this is how you should handle your sex life. The mismatch means, and I don't mean that women saying I shouldn't date someone who supports Trump. I mean teaching men that it's a lifestyle to beat women. I don't know how you miss this. The mismatch means that someone will need to compromise, and you know what that means. The Washington Post editorial board has decided someone needs to compromise, and who has to do that? It's the liberals, because you can't obviously negotiate with these conservatives because conservative political ideology is we're right and everybody else is wrong. Well, you're not going to get very far negotiating with that. Everyone else needs to bend over backwards, or in some cases bend over forwards, I guess, in order to accommodate their weird proclivities. Not unusual for the Washington Post, as it turns out, after all. As the researchers Lyman Stone and Brad Wilcox have noted, about 1 in 5 young singles will have little choice but to marry someone outside their ideological tribe. That's a weird stat. The other option is that they decline to get married at all. Wow, I thank God they invented that option, because no one would have thought of that. Not an ideal outcome, considering the data showing that marriage is good for the health of societies and individuals alike. Wow, that is a substantive point. All right. This, of course, is on average. Marriage isn't for everyone, nor is staying in a physically or emotionally abusive marriage ever the right choice. But on the whole, while potentially mixed couples, report somewhat lower levels of satisfaction than same-party couples, they are still likely to be happier than those who remain single. You spinster idiots. What a weird thing to say. I mean, it may or may not actually have social science behind it, but I mean, the general application of, partnered people tend to be happier generally in life. Yeah, than who? People who are being trafficked and beaten? Yes, that's true, but people who are single? Yes, that's also true. But how about can we compare life satisfaction, people who are single but untrafficked versus sexual battery victims who've married into it as a lifestyle. Check the stats on that one. I'd like to know whether or not people, and I love too also the mixed marriages. We're a mixed marriage. He's for misogyny, physical abuse, and trafficking, and I am not. That is a mix, to be sure. The marriage dilemma, they actually continue. There's more to this crap. Reflects a broader societal one, whether people can find ways to adapt to a new normal of ideological and political polarization instead of hoping against all evidence that it will dissipate. Unfortunately, Americans have not equipped themselves to discuss, debate, and reason across these divides. Americans have increasingly sorted themselves according to ideological orientation. They are working, living, and socializing with people who think the same things they do. And I guess that's part of trafficking too, right? You gotta have people to traffic too. You can't just hang out a shingle as a trafficker and find satisfaction that way. Oh my God. They are working, living, and socializing with people who think the same things they do, particularly on college campuses. A culture of seeking sameness has set up young Americans for disappointment. They expect people to share their own convictions and commitments. But people's insight and understanding about the world often come from considering alternative perspectives that may at first seem odd or offensive. All right. Gen Z is still relatively young, and the Trump-era divisions between single men and women might yet reverse themselves, but there's a good chance they won't, particularly if Mr. Trump manages to inject the body politic with his distinct brand of essential dread, during and after the 2024 elections. It is worth thinking both ahead of and beyond, Mr. Trump, if there is a beyond. A cultural shift might be necessary. One that views politics as a part of people's identity, but far from the most important part. Americans' ability to live together, quite literally, might depend on it. I mean, there is somewhere a kernel of truth in that, but I mean, that is an extraordinary little plot of ideological turf to stake your claim on. I mean, don't you think that's pretty weird? That and as I was saying about the Trump world is a sex cult thing, right? And so I related it to all of these because I draw these relationships all the time, and they're totally invalid, but that's the premise of the show. But all of these plans, all the stories about the different plans, really one big plan, one giant universal theory of everything, that Trump has got plans for his second administration, and he's going to take over the military. And, oh, by the way, I'm going to take over the military. Remember the whole, I'm going to be so good at the military, your head is going to spin. My head, as I recall, never spun over the fantastic accomplishments of the Trump era military. But I guess maybe I misunderstood, and my head would spin when you found out what he actually wanted to do with the military and how crazy that was. But all of the plans, the military, the judiciary, the DOJ, all the things, he's going to take over everything. There's no reason to separate it into different sectors. He's the supreme ruler of everything, and whatever he says goes. That's the plan. And, we're going to have these people try and facilitate all of that for him because Trump doesn't do anything. He just announces that he wants things done and he needs a team. That's the planning aspect of it. Who will be the team that will execute all of the dumb stuff that he brain farts out over social media and wants to rule the country that way? So that's all it is making those things happen. And then the counter wave of articles, or each of these articles considering things like, well, many people say that's just it's just aspirational, like the Hamas plans or whatever. How's that for an allegory there? I didn't even realize that was going to come together that way. Like we keep reading these things and saying, well, when people tell you that they're going to be fascist, you got to believe them. And well, when Hamas plans a gigantic attack, slaughtering thousands of you, and there's more to it than just that. But why not believe that? I don't know. Anyway. But this whole idea of like, well, there was always, the reaction was, well, he can't do that. And then, of course, the counter, he was not supposed to be able to do any of this stuff. And a lot of things he didn't accomplish. But the worrisome part of these plans is this is a way around not being able to accomplish anything in a second term. But again, also, well, these things are so outlandish. They're so clearly illegal. They're so clearly unconstitutional. It can't work out. Presidents just can't do that. And of course, they get around that by saying, well, we just did it. What are you going to do to undo it? Or can you stop us? And, working outside of established separations of power, certainly, but established institutions, etc. They're just going to bulldoze everything and say, well, make me not do it. We all, I think, realize that. But the key thing that came out of that was this weird idea of calling out, well, presidents just can't do that. Well, his supporters support him because of the number of things that they say that sound like cool fantasies to them. And then they realize, well, but presidents just can't do that. They know that too. But then this president did do those things. And you say, I don't know. I mean, I guess he's something of a magician. He keeps saying that he can do these things. And I like the idea, but I don't believe he can really do it. And then he does it. Except to the extent that actually executing it, making it last, making it a part of law. He's not very good at that part, but, certainly, presidents just can't steal money from the government. Oh, yes, they can. Watch me do it. Those he's excellent at. Changing policy, not so much. But what would convince everybody of the younger generation, these white male Gen Zs that are becoming inordinately conservative and misogynistic, for instance, what might convince them that was the path to take? Like, I do wonder, what makes somebody say, yeah, Andrew Tate's advice is good advice, And I mean, it's just, I think people look at him and they see he's a kickboxer, presumably he's in good shape. I want to be in good shape. He says he's successful with women, setting aside for a moment that success is caveman style, clubbing them over the head and imprisoning them. Well, he's very successful with that. I'll do it too. And I mean, that's the whole hook for him. What is Trump doing with this stuff? Just giving people fantasy lives and telling them we can do this stuff. No, they can't. Well, I guess like the ultimate test for the white male Gen Z generation would be, what would interest them? Well, of course, they're focused on sex and relationships to the extent that that's what comes out of it. But I guess if they had their ultimate fantasy and you had to fulfill it, you would say, well, obviously they want to have their sexual wishes granted. So no problem, because Trump world is a sex cult. That's what we're all about. Convincing you that you're going to get that crazy sex fantasy thing that you wanted all your life. We're the ones to grant it. But presidents can't grant sex fantasies. Surely everyone recognizes this. Yes. But what if I told you that this president could make the entire Washington Post editorial board print an op-ed right in their own effing paper that everybody's got to give the Gen Z white boys some slack and get them laid just like they're asking, because otherwise society will collapse. If I could get the Washington Post editorial board, the whole board, to write and endorse that editorial and print it in the Washington Post, the liberal Washington Post of all places, would you not then be convinced that I am a magician and can make anything happen? All right, I'll take that dare, because you're never going to get the entire Washington Post editorial with those liberals to write that, oh my God, he did it. How do you not join at that point? Well, I don't know. 60-something% of young white Gen Z males haven't. The vast majority, in fact, as it turns out, have not. And yet, here's this thing. So I don't know. Maybe did the Washington Post editorial board get promised that they were going to get laid if they wrote this thing? I don't know how this becomes a thing, but it did. And it's astonishing. And I told you, every single thing in this show that I'm going to mention warrants 2 hours of discussion. And we don't have that kind of time. But all right, I'm going to move on to something else because I feel like I have to. The next break is coming up, so I don't want to get too deep into the very next thing here. But let me read a couple of maybe quick hits. Yesterday, as we closed the show, I noted for the record that Finland, the total switch of subjects, Finland was closing its border with Russia because Vladimir Putin had, I don't know who's the chicken, who's the egg here, but had adopted essentially the DeSantis Abbott migrant trollery trick, right? Instead of flying migrants first from Texas to Florida and thence on to, well, they made some stops in the middle occasionally in the Carolinas as well, and then on to Martha's Vineyard, right? Isn't that where they dropped all the migrants? And Greg Abbott is busing migrants that he picks up in Texas up to New York City because we're going to own the liberals and show them, and they say they're willing to welcome migrants and we're not, so fine, make it their problem. Vladimir Putin weaponizing migrants. Well, we had heard he was doing it in Poland early on. Now, yesterday, we note that Finland has that problem. Today, Scott tells me Estonia has that problem. Politico Europe reporting on that one as well. Did our story from Finland come from Politico Europe, or was it elsewhere? Doesn't matter, really. Just the fact that it has happened. Estonia, it says now, could close their Russian border in the face of, quote, hybrid attack, using the same language that they used in Finland just the other day. Hundreds of asylum seekers have crossed into the EU in recent weeks with the support of the Kremlin, officials say. Gabriel Gavin writing this piece for Politico Europe, politico.eu. A dramatic surge in the number of migrants from Africa and the Middle East arriving in the EU's eastern frontier are a blatant hybrid attack orchestrated by Moscow, Estonia's foreign minister said, warning that crossings from Russia could be banned altogether. We'll just note for the record that this is happening. I don't know if we need to read all the way through it, but you should be. I'm going to assign you as reading these articles because, it's interesting that they're weaponizing migrants here. And I, like I said, I'm not sure who came up with this idea first. I'm not sure how these migrants are getting into Russia to begin with, but, Russia's a pretty expansive country and they border all sorts of Central Asian republics as well that people could be making their way up from Africa and the Middle East that way. But, we don't know what's happening to them inside Russia, but they're transporting them to these borders and pushing them across, knowing that it will create a humanitarian crisis. And of course they don't care and they're just hoping to do that. I thought that this was happening in Finland. It mentioned as possibility as a punishment for their joining NATO. Estonia, I don't know what their status is, but I guess they're just going to be doing this to all of their neighbors. Oh, I'm late on the music while I'm wrapped up in this thing. And, so using people as pawns and as political weapons, maybe that's something we can expand on in the next segment. But it does note here in this Politico Europe piece that these are same tactics that have been used against Poland and Lithuania in 2021, so not brand new. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. What's going to be next? Well, I don't know. We'll jump out of the Eastern European story, although it is interesting watching the latest border closures, Finland and Estonia, and mentioning that the previous incidents in Lithuania and Poland were a problem. And I guess, again, border closures happening all across Eastern Europe, almost, one might say, as if an iron curtain were descending across the continent. What an ironic thing to have happen, and an ironic way to have the curtain built, right? The first time around, it was the Soviet Union drawing the Iron Curtain to pen people in. Now, hybrid attacks leading to the closure of the borders from the other side in the name of excluding refugees. But yeah, it's a weird situation. You want to be open to welcoming in refugees, really as a matter of practicality, because you're just not going to be able to keep them out militarily. That's essentially where this is going. Like, your only other option is watching them die or actively killing them at the border. There's going to be people who there's just nothing to go back to. It's more dangerous and risky to stay where they are than to venture forth. And so in theory, you want to remain open to them as a place of asylum. But of course, that creates an exploit for people who are amoral and don't care, they'll be able to gather up the migrants and throw them at you and then challenge you on your hypocrisy when you say, we can't handle this. But there's still a big moral difference between we can't handle this, though we'd like to be able to handle this. Morally, we understand that we need to be able to handle this. We just haven't found a way to do so. And people who say, I don't care if these people die at all. I just want to embarrass the people who are moral and are upset that they can't handle everybody. I want to taunt them with the prospect of the death of these migrants in front of their very eyes, because I understand that they will feel that deeply, whereas we don't feel it at all. If you can't see the moral difference there, well, I don't know. Don't know what to tell you. But that's sort of a, I guess, if we're believing the history of active measures in the Soviet Union and in Russia, seems to be a specialty of theirs, or at least a specialty of their leaders, even if the people themselves don't believe in it. But amazing that they find these fissures to throw at you that cause you. I mean, I think their purpose is to cause you to question everything, including your own values. Do I really have this value? And that's an interesting way to maybe switch subjects to something else that I came across yesterday that raises questions and does so in a similar way. That I don't know if this was part of the design or anything, but it certainly poses a similar issue. Like, what do I really believe about these things, and why am I reacting to this differently? This, of course, takes us back to Israel and Gaza and Hamas and the attack from a slightly different angle, and a good point here being made by Dahlia Lithwick and many others, a number of other women joining her in this piece in Slate. Dahlia Lithwick, Mimi Roca, Tamara Sepper, Jennifer Taub, Joyce White Vance, and Julie Zebrak, all joining on the byline of this piece from yesterday, again in Slate. The world's feminists need to show up for Israeli victims. And then, before anybody gets excited about, well, why aren't we talking about the victims in Gaza? This is a very unique, I think, issue. And it requires, like the whole issue does, examination of things piece by piece. And the fact that you're examining one piece does not mean you don't acknowledge another piece. Unless, of course, this piece, that is to say, this article is about, which it is, a part of the issue that is, in fact, not, I think, being sufficiently acknowledged, or at least they think it's not being sufficiently acknowledged. I have to agree. I don't see a lot of discussion of it. And it brings up a good point. And you have to remember that, as with all of this situation and every situation, you have to have room in your head for different and conflicting ideas to reside. Otherwise, you won't get married and the species ends. Okay, just want to point that out. Solidarity for victims of sexual assault, they say in the subheader here. Should Trump, not lowercase t, should Trump other politics? But of course, you could throw the uppercase T in there too, because this is about rape and politicized rape at that. So trigger warning, I guess, for this is really, actually should get one, because there's sort of a disturbing concept wrapped up in all of this beyond just the rape. It's the disappointing concept of, once again, turning a blind eye to one of the worst things that could happen to anyone, happening to women, and suddenly no one cares anymore. It's a weird thing. You wouldn't, what do you mean they don't care? Of course they care. Well, do they? Here's the question, as it's posed there. Of all the horrors coming out of the Israel-Hamas conflict, among the most horrible are the barbaric murders, rapes, sexual assaults, and kidnappings of women and young girls in Israel during the October 7th attack by Hamas. Now, I think everybody, well, some of the most extreme folks still refuse to acknowledge the attacks of October 7th as a part of the equation. or simply denied that they even took place. Nobody that I have conversed extensively with about the subject has actually said that, but it's clear that there are such people, but there's always extremes everywhere. But yeah, this makes a good point. Even the people who are clearly acknowledging it sort of acknowledge this overarching issue of, well, on October 7th, there were horrific attacks, murders everywhere as part of it was a main objective of the attack, thousands of murders. Less frequently discussed, though occasionally enumerated among the atrocities of that day, not to diminish atrocities of later dates by other parties, but this date, October 7th, contained lots of atrocities, and they do say, well, and there were also sexual assaults, rapes, and kidnappings, etc. But to focus on the fact that actually a lot of this, and now that we have, I guess, the battle plans, as it turns out, have had them for a year or more in the hands of Israeli intelligence, and that they, in fact, did follow those plans more or less to the letter, and that those advanced plans did also include a specific campaign of sexualized violence, sexualized political violence from Hamas, is an amazing thing. Like, while we're talking about atrocities and war crimes, and people, are accusing Israel of perpetrating its own, and having done so for years before this conflict, and doing so, I guess, resuming that operation now. But somehow we kind of skipped over, well, an organized campaign of politicized and militarized rape is a pretty clear war crime. It is. And it happened on October 7th, and it's, of course, part of a larger picture that everyone must pay attention to, whichever direction the violence is directed and by whom. But the thing is that this is sort of getting papered over, and that's very, very bad for women everywhere, because that's kind of been the history of women everywhere. And when are we going to stop making this mistake? I'll let them make the argument by reading the piece here. Again, among the most horrible are these acts taken against women and young girls in Israel during the October 7th attack by Hamas. And yet, deepening this distressing event, there has been a disheartening silence about, or worse, denial of these evils, reticence from the voices here at home in the U.S. who have, in the past, embraced other women who needed their support. Israeli and Jewish women find themselves isolated. For the past 3 decades, women have stood up for other women. Finally, right? At long last, they've been able to do so. When our sisters' bodies and dignity were targeted and violated, women and allies of all ages and backgrounds organized, supported, and spoke out. Except somehow, not this time. Or at least it certainly hasn't been the chief focus of people speaking up this time. And that's because they've been distracted from being able, and prevented in many cases from being able to do so by the fact that another horror has been piled on top of this one in immediate succession. Maybe that wasn't a great idea. Since October 7th, there has been overwhelming evidence, and of course people denying that evidence as well, but with less basis, I think. Overwhelming evidence that Israeli women and young girls were not just, and that's in quotes, just slaughtered, because that's bad, but raped, assaulted, tortured, and kidnapped. This is not overstating things. From our work as prosecutors, lawyers, and feminists, we understand what it takes to build a solid criminal case for sexual assault. Here, there is voluminous evidence, more than what is typically available. While many victims cannot speak for themselves because they are either dead or being held hostage, survivor accounts and videos made by the perpetrators themselves speak for them. Early on, Hamas circulated a video with the searing image of 19-year-old Naama Levy being dragged by her hair into the back of a truck by a group of men. Her pants were bloody, and slowly the horror dawned upon us as we watched. What did that mean? That she had been likely the victim of violent sexual assault. A survivor recounted sexual violence she witnessed while hiding at the Nova rave. That was the big dance party that got attacked. She said the terrorists, people from Gaza, raped girls, and after they raped them, they killed them, murdered them with knives, or the opposite, killed, and after they raped, they did that. They laughed. Apparently, the accusation here, in addition to raping people and then killing them, because why not, they apparently did it occasionally in the opposite order as well and killed them and raped their dead bodies. That's pretty astonishing, to say the least. Another survivor saw terrorists gang raping a woman who was alive until she was shot in the head by a man who was still raping her when he fired. Before she was killed, the witness saw them cut her breast off. This is, weapons-grade war crimes going on, but because another wave of war crimes was piled on top of it, there was no time to reflect on this and to organize and to speak out against it. And then, of course, the politicized atmosphere made it almost impossible to do so for various reasons. We heard from a grandmother who was watched helplessly as her daughter was raped and then murdered. A combat paramedic found 2 young girls executed in their bedroom, at least one of whom had been raped. Her pants were down toward her knees. There was semen on her back. She was shot in the head. The worst possible imagery, right? Israeli officials are reporting evidence of widespread torture and rape as they continue the painstaking work of trying to identify bodies, many burned beyond recognition. I can't recall if they discussed this in this article, but even just in the most mundane possible way, if there is a mundane possible way to follow up on a rape, that's what happened here. The crime of rape over and over again all over southern Israel, but it was as part of an attack, an open warfare. There's no opportunity. The police can't come in and collect rape kits and prosecute 1,000 rape cases in the middle of all-out war in Gaza or across southern Israel. And of course, most of the evidence has been destroyed. There won't be testimony from the victims because many of them are dead or have been kidnapped and their bodies that were left behind were burned. This is just a wave of rapes that essentially the authorities in Israel are going to have to say, fog of war too. Imagine that happening to you. That's going to inflict some psychological trauma on top of all of the things that the rest of the war crimes in every place, in every direction, are going to impose on people. These horrific crimes that essentially are, going to go essentially, in terms of finding the actual perpetrators, going unpunished. Can't say that they're going unpunished in the face of a massive bombing campaign, but that's not punishment for rapes either. The people, for the most part, being killed in the bombing campaign would have had nothing to do with that. There's no, what else do you suggest to them? I see people are discussing a little bit about, not directly on this point, but discussing the resumption of hostilities and saying, what else, the problem with the way the whole thing was handled from start to finish, finding out about the plans ahead of time and assuming that they were fantasy. If you know in your heart that if you can't anticipate an attack like that, I guess, or that they'd even want to launch an attack like that, you're not paying much attention to things. But in America, you're not supposed to be paying attention to these things, but in Israel, but to get these plans and to say, let's do nothing because it probably won't happen. And nobody says, somebody clearly did if you read the story about the intelligence failure, but somebody said this, but not enough people said, well, what's going to happen here? What are our options in all this? What should we be doing? Because if they launch this attack and we let them launch this attack, or we're looking the other way when they launch this attack, what are we going to do about it? And the only answer likely to come out of that is, well, you know who we're talking about. You know who we're dealing with, who the parties to this are. They're going to bomb the crap out of Gaza. They're going to kill thousands of people, probably not even the people responsible for this attack. But What other option have they got? They can't just say, well, you came across the border, killed 1,000 people and raped 1,000 women and kidnapped a bunch of them and took them back to Gaza and God knows what's happening to them there. Well, we're going to have to let that be water under the bridge. That's not going to happen, right? But if your only option is, well, indiscriminate bombing and killing of thousands of children on the other side of the border, if that's your option, then why aren't you working harder to make sure you don't have to exercise that option? Is a legitimate question. I don't know. All right, back to this horrific story. Of course, I don't know. I don't want to minimize the impact by not reading it, but it's a recounting of a number of similar atrocities in here. Although sometimes you kind of have to bear witness to that. And that's what's being asked here. All right. I think we left off in acknowledging that the Israeli authorities are not going to be able to investigate the rapes as crimes at all. And it's all just going to have to be dismissed in some way as the fog of war here. An Israeli non-governmental commission led by Kochav Elkayim Levi has embarked on a grassroots initiative, and I guess it's going to have to be, to assemble a comprehensive database of the sexual violence cases from October 7th. I mean, just as a psychological a support system, I guess you have to try and do that, even if it's not going to change anything on the ground for the victims here. But, okay, a grassroots initiative to assemble the comprehensive database of the sexual violence cases from October 7th while offering trauma care to survivors and witnesses. And Physicians for Human Rights Israel, a group dedicated to advocating for the healthcare rights of patients with limited access to the Israeli healthcare system, including migrants, refugees, and Palestinian residents of the West Bank and Gaza. And again, a lot of the direct victims of October 7th attacks were themselves peace activists. That has to be pointed out as well. Well, anyway, they have recently issued a position paper that calls on the International Criminal Court to investigate the sexual terrorism that Israeli women experienced on October 7th as a potential crime against humanity. While time will tell whether October 7th will receive its due international legal scrutiny. There we are. The muted response from women's groups, this is the point of the article, is unacceptable given the abundance of evidence. If survivor accounts, tortured bodies, and videos of attacks aren't enough evidence, then no case would ever be prosecuted in a court of law. Such evidence of depravity typically galvanizes global action and demands for justice. Women's groups should rightfully be demanding prosecution. Beyond the courtroom, the evidence of what happened to women and girls in Israel far surpasses what has sparked women to come to the aid and support of other women in other situations. Historically, women have been at the forefront of advocacy. Here in the U.S., we demanded safety for victims of sexual assaults on campus and take back the night marches in the 1990s. We advocated for women in other countries, creating hashtag and social media campaigns like Bring Our Girls Home in 2014 to demand the return of 276 Nigerian girls abducted by the jihadi militant group Boko Haram. In 2017, we protested Donald Trump's sexism and misogyny by the millions at the Women's March. The hashtag #MeToo movement saw us sharing our stories to combat a culture rife with sexual harassment and assault. We supported Christine Blasey Ford when she testified against Supreme Court Justice nominee Brett Kavanaugh at his confirmation hearing in 2018. We marched when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022. We strive to center women of color and indigenous women whose stories don't always receive the respect they deserve. Again and again, we have demanded that women be believed because we know that all too often women's stories are unfairly questioned and ignored. But the expected outrage hasn't happened here in the U.S. or abroad outside of Jewish groups. Some international organizations quickly issued statements about the heartbreaking suffering in Gaza, but are resolutely mute regarding the atrocities against women in Israel on October 7th. Worse yet, we have heard denials or sentiment that the victims deserved it. somehow. And how about this? There's a link to an actual, I guess, example of this. So I haven't read the link. I'm kind of interested in seeing what she uses to see if it stands up to this charge. Pro-Palestinian letter from Harvard students provokes alumni outrage. That was a Reuters story from October 10th. But reserving that for later and for your own examination, if you wish, over the weekend to see whether it stands up to the accusation that it is a sentiment expressing that the victims deserved these rapes. We would not tolerate, they continue, victim blaming in other cases of violence against women. We're not supposed to, anyway. Compassion for Gazan women and children is vital, but it should not negate compassion for victims on the Israeli side of the border on October 7th. Sexual violence should be abhorrent to all of us, no matter who it is perpetrated against or where they live. The victims of the October 7th attack stand excluded from the world's sisterhood. In the face of overwhelming real-time documentation, murmurs of support are few and far between. We must ask ourselves, from a place of empathy for all who suffer, does our outrage about rape and abuse depend on the identity of the perpetrator and the victim? Is rape acceptable, even justifiable, if the victims live in a nation whose policies you disapprove of? And I imagine everyone still says no, they don't. But then why no voicing of support? Well, it's complicated. Can we blame these victims, many but not all of whom are Israeli, for what happened to them? If the answer to these questions is no, and I still think everybody's answer to those questions is no, as it should be, then we must all speak out about the violence, no matter who it is perpetrated against or where they live. To express moral outrage and legal horror at the offenses perpetrated on women in Israel is not tantamount to approving the governing Netanyahu coalition, nor does it signal support for the bombings in Gaza. It is simply to assert the long-standing feminist argument that our bodies are not to be weaponized in global conflicts. That's the common thread with the previous story, weaponizing of bodies in global conflicts. Acknowledging these atrocities does not diminish the suffering of Palestinian women in Gaza. It is essential to reaffirming our shared humanity. A good point, not the only point that can be made about this particular angle, this aspect of the issue. Certainly not the only point that can be made about the issue as a whole, but one that hasn't gotten any attention. Not a lot of things have gotten that much attention about it on this show, but certainly in the media as a whole. It's a good point. I think we all have the capacity to absorb it along with other good points that are made about the situation. That was a tough one. But I felt like one that kind of had to be a part of the conversation, as difficult as it was. There are 10,000 other things that we need to consider here as we approach the third break and then the final segment. I'll add only this to the story, the other big story of the day out of Israel, the New York Times piece being the one, the first, and maybe, I don't know, there was an exclusive or whatever, but the first one I saw. You would likely have read this story already because it's just too shocking a headline not to read into. Israel knew Hamas's attack plan more than a year ago. That's the headline. A blueprint reviewed by the Times laid out the attack in detail. Israeli officials dismissed it as aspirational and ignored specific warnings. This is Ronan Bergman and Adam Goldman on the piece. And it is just as it says. You probably have seen the details. I just found the whole thing amazing in a number of ways, including, I thought what jumped out to me as one of the most interesting things was that at least one intelligence analyst steadfastly refusing to go along with the assessment that, well, this is all aspirational. They can't actually do this. They don't have the resources to do it. They don't have the fighters necessary, or this isn't even in their wish list anymore. It comports with the previous reports that the Israeli government had decided as a matter of policy that Gaza and Hamas in Gaza wasn't an external threat, beyond the fact that they were launching rockets pretty regularly into Israel. But they weren't thinking about this new ground invasion idea. But then they find the plans and they find a way to dismiss them. But which is amazing all by itself. But then that there should be an analyst saying, no, you need to take this seriously. It makes puts in mind for me the maybe entirely fictional concept that was illustrated in that crazy movie, a zombie movie. Zombie movies pretty much explain everything, right? World War Z, right? It rang truthy, even if it's not actually necessarily true, that the Israelis might made historical sense that in reaction to their having been totally surprised in the 1973 war, they might have adopted a policy like the one imagined, anyway, for World War Z, that it's someone's duty to take this stuff seriously if the intelligence suggests that there might be an incomprehensible attack looming. And you have to argue, for your own safety, that this could be real. Well, of course, the 1973 war was real, and they really did have that problem, and they could have evaluated this thing differently, and they didn't.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So we were transitioning over the break. What a great time for a break, eh? You wonder sometimes why we do this stuff. There's a reason. But, so yes, the idea that you could get a warning like this ahead of time. This is, I presume, is going to be a huge problem for the Netanyahu government, who has already lost the trust of the vast majority of the Israeli population, specifically on intelligence and protecting Israel from the Hamas threat in particular. But if you've seen the movie and you're familiar with the World War Z thing that I'm talking about, there's this presentation that there's a concept that they call the 10th man, and I don't know whether it's based on anything in reality at all. But it sounds truthy. It sounds like the sort of thing you should be doing if you're not doing it. But, you know, there's lots that people should be doing in the way of intelligence and conducting global affairs that they're not doing. But the idea was basically that, look, if you get intelligence like this and there's unanimous agreement that this is what it means for whether, you know, to take it seriously, not take it seriously, whatever. But if there's unanimous agreement that this thing that we found out about, let's say, for instance, by way of example, is not a threat, it's just not real, or they just can't do this stuff, then as a matter of safety and self-preservation, it should be, as the movie described it, the duty of someone anyway, someone does, some designated actor or whatever, but somebody has got to say, wait a minute, before we unanimously agree that this is not a threat and end up doing nothing, and then thereby expose ourselves to the danger of underreacting and then being caught, quote unquote, by surprise, even though we've been warned, somebody's got to say, just as a devil's advocate, what if this is real? What do we have to do to prepare? right? So that you can all then say, all right, we all really don't think it's a serious threat, but is there something we could be doing to mitigate this threat just in case? Sure, fine. Thank you for bringing it up. And that was the idea. Now, in the context of this movie, I don't even know if it needs to be explained. It's a zombie movie. So what are they preparing for? Zombies somehow. Why? Because somebody said they saw one somewhere, or thousands of them somewhere. Reports are coming in from around the world. And obviously you're going to say, well, they must not know what they're talking about. There aren't undead people running around on the planet murdering people willy-nilly, right? We unanimously agree that this can't be what is really happening here. In this case, happening in India. And the Israelis intercept this thing. But, to illustrate the concept, one guy is assigned the job of, well, what if it's true? What should we be doing to prepare? That's the premise in the movie. And it's hinted that this becomes Israeli policy after having been surprised and nearly destroyed in the 1973 war. You could see them coming away with that as a conclusion. Well, we did a really poor job in acting on intelligence that became available to us prior to the 1973 attacks. They got satellite imagery that showed troop movements, troops amassing along the Israeli border, and they said, it's probably just an exercise. I mean, why you would have assumed that, prior to 1973 even, I don't know. Well, we're kind of in a tenuous situation here. We have lots of enemies. We're bordered entirely by enemies. They've attacked us a number of times in the past. I don't know how they came to that conclusion, but they did. So the theory is you say, well, let's not do that anymore. As a result of the near catastrophic results of 1973. And it's pointed out in this story that there's this one intelligence analyst who's like, but didn't you have exactly this experience in exactly this place? In 1973, wasn't it the case that it was along the southern border and the border with Egypt that this thing became obvious and you did nothing and you nearly suffered disaster as a result, and then afterwards maybe did, maybe didn't conclude maybe we shouldn't do it this way anymore? You're doing it again, which is really astonishing all by itself. I just found that kind of amazing. By the way, I was also amazed as they were discussing the particular intelligence unit by its number. I mean, I don't know how many such units there are, but the Israeli intelligence unit was mentioned in this story. I'm just going to skim and see if I can see the number. There we are. Unit 8200. I don't know how they refer to it. I don't know how they say the numbers. I guess we could find out how they say it in Hebrew, but it wouldn't be of much use to us. But this was where this particular analyst who put her foot down, I think it was a woman, put her foot down about, no, you're regarding this entirely upside down and backwards from the way you ought to be doing it. It was from Unit 8200. And I wondered whether that was the unit that I actually had in pocket, just as an interesting story that we're just never going to get to share any other way. Somewhere here, a story of a particular Israeli intelligence unit that has a very interesting story that you might want to read over the weekend just because. And it's a different unit. But again, the fact that it was numbered and was an intelligence unit made me wonder if it was. And it's a different one. This is a story about Unit 9900 in the Atlantic, which I'll just give you the premise of from the headline and lead, and maybe you'll want to read about it. It has nothing to do with this story, but it was intriguing just in general, since a Friday kind of a sense. The Israeli army unit that recruits teens with autism. That's maybe interesting, maybe innovative, maybe horrific. I'm not sure which, maybe all of those things. Many autistic soldiers who would otherwise be exempt from military service have found a place in Unit 9900, a selective intelligence squad where heightened perceptual skills are an asset. Interesting story in the Atlantic by Shira Rubin, dated for quite a long time ago. I'm sure somebody was circulating it recently in connection with these issues and the latest round of war. But this comes from January of 2016, so I guess it's still in existence. I just thought it was a really interesting concept. And using neurodivergent talents in something as otherwise difficult as intelligence analysis. In other words, to use but one example, the ability to sit and stare at surveillance and security video, sometimes for hours on end, and be able to pick up subtle clues from visual evidence that neurotypical people might be more apt to miss. It was a very interesting examination of, I guess, mainstreaming the talents of the neurodivergent, but not in a particularly sympathetic way. I mean, and maybe in January of 2016, it might have been less hot a topic, but at the moment, it doesn't really help. It is not going to be able to say, well, isn't that interesting and inventive for the Israeli military? Okay, now you're on taboo subject again. But it is interesting, maybe exploitative in a way, even. I don't know. Depends how you'll feel about these things. But I just thought that's an interesting bit to throw in there for your weekend reading if you want to change directions. All right. In breaking news, I am informed from several sources, I guess the news now breaking everywhere. Sandra Day O'Connor has died, former Supreme Court Justice. And I don't know. We'll just put that on the record there for you. Maybe, Scott, in informing me about it, also threw in the note. Maybe this is the third of the celebrity deaths, as they say. They come in threes, but they actually come one after the other in an endless torrent, and you can self-select for the three. But there it is, 93 years old, first female Supreme Court justice, for the most part well-regarded in all quarters. And so just wanted to keep you up to date on that news. I guess debate already underway also in the George Santos expulsion situation. Did they not do the debate yesterday? Maybe there's more debate. Or actually, what did I see? I saw people giving statements on the record, not on the floor, but giving statements to the press, rather, about how they were going to vote on that situation. I don't know whether the vote has begun yet or not, but somebody with one eye on C-SPAN can tell us about that. All right, let's see. What else can we cram in for today? I have actually a pre-recorded piece here, but it was a pretty long one. And ordinarily Friday is an excellent day for that stuff. And it's topical too, because it came from Seth Chipman, which isn't what makes it topical, but is what makes it interesting. We've heard from Seth in the past, but this too on the Israel-Hamas situation. And I'm wondering if I can quickly find the article that he based it on, and that he was reading, just if I can remind myself quickly what this was about and whether we want to discuss things separately or add the recorded bit to the roundup today. I just don't think we can manage it today. It's a very good one, and it builds on something that we touched on earlier, which makes it a great candidate for inclusion today, but perhaps we can set aside some other time from it. An essay in The Atlantic is what he's reading, called What Hamas Promises Iranians Know Too Well. An very interesting angle on the whole situation. We read earlier that young Iranians were not particularly convinced, let's say, of the Iranian regime's interest in the Israel-Palestine conflict in its entirety, and that this was producing essentially the opposite reaction that the regime was hoping for in the current Israel-Hamas war. But this adds a new angle to this. Given that there's this disconnect between the youngest generations in Iran and the regime's aims and interest in Israel-Palestine conflict, this is an interesting addition to it. Well, why does it happen? And again, probably concentrating among the younger generations, But basically, but also taking cues from the older generations who lived through the Islamic Revolution there in 1979 and saying, the issue here is, you in Gaza, who may or may not actually support Hamas, and there's lots of reasons to believe that the general populace doesn't, at least not in the traditional sense that we here in America understand supporting a political party. Well, they've murdered all their rivals. Do I support them? If you ask me in public, I'll say yes. But do I? Maybe not. Similar situation in Iran. Do I support the regime? Gotta say so, but I don't, right? And basically saying that's what you're in for in Palestine. If you're flirting with the idea that, well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't supported them in the past, but they are making things happen. I mean, those things are war crimes in themselves, but they are making, and you can understand, if not condone, because you won't condone it, because condoning war crimes is not a thing you're into. But you could understand the warped psychology of coming to the conclusion that war crimes have been perpetrated against us for this much time. And isn't it, it's not stopping. Might not the solution be to perpetrate war crimes of our own in order to show them what it feels like? Bad idea, but an idea that occurs to people a lot. It happens everywhere. It happens here. We say things like, well, Donald Trump, for instance, and his people, they just don't understand or acknowledge the value of law and order. They say they're for law and order, but they spit on the Constitution and they don't care. And it's just a piece of paper, and they'll trample your rights and they'll murder you in the next go round, the next January 6th, just as quickly as anybody else. And shouldn't we stop them? And isn't the legal process too slow and plodding and unwieldy an instrument with which to do it? And shouldn't we, for one time only, for good reasons, just dispense with all of that and just, golly gee, Ceausescu Donald Trump? Well, it's an attractive thought, but we are reminded by our consciences and the consciences of others speaking out in case yours is broken down momentarily or you're indulging it, that, yes, that would be an enormous problem in its own right, and probably, given the results of history around the world, not solve everything all at once. On the other hand, Romania has fewer problems than it could be having right now. So I'm just saying, it's easy to fall into that, and this will be an interesting addition, even if we can't shoehorn it in today. There are too many other things that I want to bring to your attention. Let's see. Maybe one thing I can do here. I hinted at this earlier on in the show. This is a total reversal of the field again, but Joan had written this up. The story of what happened at the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday and maybe earlier as well. Dick Durbin, of all people, outmaneuvering Republicans at a judiciary hearing. That is a rare thing and deserves attention when it happens. Subpoenas issued in the Supreme Court ethics probe. Leonard Leo among them, as we mentioned. So here's what Joan had to say about this stuff. Senate Judiciary Committee Republicans tried to shut the committee down on Thursday with histrionic fits and manufactured outrage. Never. Really? Over Democrats' plans to proceed with subpoenas to Gop megadonor Harlan Crow and conservative judicial activist Leonard Leo. They failed, that is, the Republicans did, walking into a procedural trap of their own making. And the committee voted 11-0 to issue the subpoenas. The nothing, I think, comes from Republicans walking out in that situation. Not very effective, but they did do it. Republicans got obnoxious right out of the gate, objecting to Chair Dick Durbin's efforts to finish with some housekeeping matters. There were a few judicial nominees that had already been approved, but needed a third vote because of a procedural technicality that GOP senators had attempted to use to kill the nominations. Because that's what they do. Republicans repeatedly shouted down the clerk who was trying to conduct the roll call votes and tried to filibuster. Hard to do in the committee situation, or, not supposed to be that easy. Durbin, citing the precedent of former Republican chairs Chuck Grassley and Lindsey Graham, and then pushed ahead on the nominees against Republican opposition, resulting in more histrionics from the Gop members. Can't believe you're actually doing to us what we did to you. The Republicans' goal was to waste 2 hours of committee time. Why? So they could invoke a rule that limits the committee's sessions to 2 hours. They had 177 amendments to the subpoenas. How do you amend the subpoena? Well, it can be done. It's not as hard to amend as a nomination, but okay, 177 amendments to the subpoenas because that was so totally serious and everyone was a precious diamond. They lined them all up to see if they couldn't waste those 2 hours on the nominees, but Durbin had a procedural ace up his sleeve and the votes to use it. He suspended the 2-hour rule, and all 11 Democrats voted to issue the subpoenas while all the Republicans walked out. They think they're going to roll over and we're going to roll over. They think we're going to roll over and come back sometime later and try all over again and face the same limitations, Durbin told Politico after the brouhaha. You know, there reaches a point where there has to be a vote. They walked out on it. That's their decision. Isn't that amazing? All of a sudden, very important to be able to just call a vote. Just do it already. Don't allow filibusters. Well, I'm glad he came to that conclusion. Unsurprisingly, Politico reports, Leo issued a statement of his own saying he would simply refuse to comply. Senate Judiciary Committee Democrats have been destroying the Supreme Court. How? I don't know. They haven't been able to do it. 6-3. That's a real destruction. They are now destroying the Senate. Leo said, I will not cooperate with this unlawful campaign of political retribution. Since he's handpicked a great many of the federal judges under the last 2 Republican presidents, he's probably confident that he'd end up getting in front of a friendly one if Durbin pushes the matter and, say, holds him in contempt. I don't know how good the odds are in D.C. They're not bad. They're better than they would have been without Leonard Leo's activity, but they're not great. So I'm not certain that that's a really good play. But what the hell? Try it anyway. Watch Graham's meltdown if you want, right here with embedded video in Jones' piece, and Durbin's refusal to allow the committee to be hijacked yet again. So you can actually see it for yourself. It's pretty entertaining. But maybe I'm going to probably spend some time with it over the weekend and see if there's more to be mined out of the procedural situation. But it's good to see Durbin come to that realization every once in a while and know that there are precedents out there left behind for him by previous Republican chairs. You know, he doesn't tend to use that on the blue slips. We always come back to that and criticize him on the blue slips. You know, don't know whether that's going to change in the future. Maybe he says, well, I'm holding the line on the blue slips, so that entitles me to be more hardcore on other things. Maybe that's a good trade-off. I don't know, but interesting and part of the landscape and deserved mention before closing out for the weekend here. All right, let's see. Man, there's a lot. I mentioned, well, you know what? Let's acknowledge this too. This seems something worth putting on the record, and we'll do it very quickly. We mentioned as part of the unusual story about the Florida Republican chair and his Moms for Liberty wife and what they're up to down there, and the relation to book banning. I just wanted to acknowledge that I have seen this story, and here's a press release from Penguin Random House, the publishing house, which brings this news to light. How we're fighting censorship, legal action. Well, okay, what kind of legal action are we talking about? They're suing states, like whole states, the government of states, and I think they're suing Iowa first. Censorship, they note, in the form of book bans is a direct threat to democracy and our constitutional rights, as well as their mission, to create books for everyone. Like, yeah, this is your product. When are you going to step up? Oh, you are stepping up? Great. That's why we're defending books in court. We've provided some information about current legal action below. As the conversation surrounding book bans across the country increases, we'll continue to share updates about Penguin Random House's efforts. I can't believe we're going to be cheering for a major publishing imprint as a corporate entity, but Good. Penguin Random House files lawsuit against Iowa for First and 14th Amendment violations. They are, of course, exactly the violations you're thinking of. You should feel free, I'll include a link to it, to review their release in the interest of saving time and hitting on a few other issues before we close things out. I'll let you read it for yourself, but good, great, fantastic step up. There should be some institutional interest in there. There's some corporate money sitting there. Why not make use of it? Why does it always have to be grassroots money and going up against these, against states? And who knows whether any individual would have standing to sue anyway? Probably not. Would a publishing company? It would be a lot more interesting and difficult to watch Republican appointed judges construct a theory of standing. It's easy enough. They could just, I don't know, why bother constructing a theory? They can just rule against you. But they like to try to construct theories. It'll be interesting to watch Federalist Society judges construct a theory that not only do individuals not have standing to sue anybody, but neither do corporations. Basically, no one can sue anybody, and we have no jobs left anymore. And let AI do all the deciding, I guess, is the ultimate result of all this. But wanted to note that that was happening and that there were corporate entities taking action we can, if not get behind, get alongside and say, good on you. Let's you and him fight. Okay? You, corporations versus the state of Iowa. Go for it. Maybe we'll all get some benefits out of this one. Another story that I have not been able to touch on yet, but which I might be wise to advise you of. There was another big story in, Politico, that a court filing, I'll read you the Politico headline, court filing reveals Representative Scott Perry's vast web of contacts in bid to reverse 2020 election. We all knew that he was, of course, one of the chief plotters, and I guess there's now a new cache of text messages and emails that briefly became available. The subheader tells us that a federal appeals court on Wednesday released previously secret text messages from Perry, only to remove them from the public docket later in the day. But Kyle Cheney, I guess, among others, spotted them and has exploited them and brought us, I guess, new specific insights into exactly what Perry was planning. And that's resulting in a rash of stories being mined from this tranche all by itself. Let's see what sort of ideas are out there as a result. At 11:08 p.m. on December 30th, 2020, days before Donald Trump prepared to install Jeff Clark atop the Justice Department amid his frenzied push to remain in power, Clark got a text from one key ally, Representative Scott Perry. And it said, "POTUS seems very happy with your response. I read it just as you dictated," Perry texted the senior Justice Department official. Interesting intrigue happening there. "I'm praying. This makes me quite nervous. And wonder if I'm worthy or ready," Clark replied. Everybody is being picked by God here. "You are the man. I have confirmed it. God does what he does for a reason," Perry continued. Imagine in the middle of all this coup plotting, thinking that God was on your side in all this, except I thought he was on my side. Well, anyway, at the time, Clark was supporting Trump's false claims of voter fraud, and Trump, hoping to harness the Justice Department in his bid to overturn the 2020 election, was nearing a decision to appoint Clark, as we know, as acting Attorney General. He ultimately backed off amid high-level rebellion at DOJ and in the White House, but the newly disclosed text messages contained in a court filing that appears to have been erroneously made public on Wednesday show that Clark was girding for the appointment and bolstered by support from Perry, a conservative leader in Congress. So some new insight into that situation as it was developing is available from the Politico story. I'll include it again in Scott's roundup. And gosh, I mean, boy, there's an awful lot. Let me add to the collection for reading. Perhaps you'll want to take a look at, even though this is all about confirmation of priors for us, Robert Kagan's piece in the Washington Post, "A Trump dictatorship is increasingly inevitable. We should stop pretending." And we really should. And it was a well-put piece, but long And for the most part, not anything that we haven't considered in the past, but it's good, fun reading about the dictatorship that's in the offing. And, well, I guess it might perhaps renew your enthusiasm for fighting against it along the way. Let's see. Maybe one more thing I'll shoehorn in just as recommended reading for the week. Oh, and by the way, the dangers of taking the bylines directly from Pocket on this one. This is actually Judd Legum, with the help of Rebecca Crosby in his Popular Information newsletter. Just an interesting sideshow to the whole story. Mysterious woman tells school board that Scholastic Books, the brand Scholastic Books, sparked porn addiction. They had another one of these crazy hearings on all the book bans, and the Scholastic Book Fair, which I think is, known and beloved by most anyway around the country as just, a great thing that gets kids interested in reading and buying trinkets and crap along the way, but also reading. And, well thought of generally. But, of course, they got to get rid of that because they're books. And conservatives hate books and knowledge and skills, apparently. So anyway, they had a hearing, and this weird woman from out of nowhere showed up to say, Scholastic Books, those wholesome, wonderful things that they sell to kids all over the place, are actually full of porn, and we got to get rid of them. And you might wonder, what the hell are you talking about? And do you know what porn is? Well, that didn't matter. What mattered was that this woman came from out of nowhere, and as it turns out, she works for basically a rival book company and managed to get herself recognized to come with this crazy theory. She had a whole sob story. Now she's a porn addict. What's she doing working in children's books as a porn addict? Well, she's not a porn addict. It's not true. It was all garbage just to try to make herself look like some sort of sympathetic victim. But as it turns out, she worked for the other company. Amazing, great, journalism, great discovery. Hopefully that story develops, but only it'll end up developing in the shadow of impending dictatorship here in the United States and continuing human rights atrocities in Israel, Palestine, and around the world. Hooray!
From
Happy weekend, everybody.
NetworksRadio.com.
Tough
You have
week.
been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Time now to figure out what's happening with George Santos and keep an eye on what's happening on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Some idea about that. He's going to be covering the Scott Perry stuff. That's good news. And how about another stories? There are many. I can't dive into it. I've run out of time. It's time to let Justice Putnam tell you the stories. He comes up next. We'll see you next week.